You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 200. On today's show, we talk with lighting designer Carl Faber, and we discuss freelancing in theater in Portland, Oregon, zone defense, AI entering our workflow, ethics of credit cards and big banks and all sorts of things, using local credit unions instead of those big banks, our fellow lighting designer Mark McCullough, being a parent and a freelance theater designer, HELOCs, which are home equity lines of credits, and the biggest piece of advice that I want us to take away from today's show, which is to build systems in your life to help you succeed, whether that be in saving for retirement or churning out a light plot faster or meeting deadlines without waiting for a last minute deadline. Whatever it is, systems are important. Before we get to the interview, I have a little bit of housekeeping to address. So if you want to get right to our conversation, jump ahead a few minutes. And if you want to hear the housekeeping, or if you're in a spot where you can't hit the skip button, then here it comes. All right. The interview today is very lighting designer focused. Now, it also sounds like mid-career colleagues and newish fathers catching up. And that's because that's basically what it is. Carl and I are both putting in lots of hours in our careers and as parents. And so while we centered the chat around the business of our careers, we did so in sometimes roundabout ways that I hope you're okay listening through. We also recorded it 3 months ago because I wanted to get it out for our 6th year podcast anniversary, but this aforementioned life and career thing have gotten me distracted. And I'll talk more about it at the end of the episode, but you are hearing this episode today because a college student reached out to me and said, "I'm enjoying the show. Please put out more episodes." The next thing on the agenda is that the Tony Awards just happened. So if you're into lighting design like me, you may have listened to various podcast episodes with some of the nominees. And I want to shout out to one, which is our sister podcast, Light Talk. They have an amazing hour-long interview with Jen Schriever, who was nominated for The Lost Boys. It will make you want to see the show. It's a fantastic interview, and it's conducted by a previous co-host of this show, Dennis Size, who, by the way, is celebrating his 1-year anniversary of hosting Light Talk. So congratulations, Dennis, on that, but also for this fantastic interview that blended talk of the technical elements of the Lost Boys production along with Jen Schriever's career. So anyway, I'll put a link for that in the show notes. Speaking of Jen, she was a guest on our show when we recorded live at LDI in 2022. So that's one Tony nominee that's been on our show. But there were several others that I have to recognize. So Heather Gilbert, nominated for 2 this year, for Bug and for The Fear of 13. Heather was also one of my very first Patreon patrons for this show, so I'm always going to love her for that, aside from her incredible talent and her kindness as a lighting designer. Don Holder, who is a previous guest, he was nominated this year for Schmigadoon and for Ragtime. Isabella Bird, nominated for Dog Day Afternoon. Jane Cox, nominated for The Rocky Horror Show. And Paul Tazwell for costumes for Joe Turner's Come and Gone. So if anybody's keeping track, our previous podcast guests have been nominated for 8 Tony Awards this year. And I'm not saying that correlation is causation, but I'm not saying that. But anyway, because I love lighting, I do want to give a shout out to the lighting nominees that unfortunately haven't been on our show. So Natasha Chivers for Oedipus, Stacy DeRosier for Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Jack Knowles for Death of a Salesman, Kevin Adams for Chess, Adam Honore for Ragtime, and Cats the Jellicle Ball. Stacy, we haven't had on the show, but we've mentioned because she was a student of Jane Cox's and they've been design collaborators since then. Also, I want to point out Adam Honore, his career is just on fire, and some of the productions he has lit are just so incredible, and that is certainly reflected with his 2 nominees this year. But congratulations to everybody, because I know when I taught at ASU, I was accused of the Broadway binary, which is there's Broadway and then there's not Broadway. And that misses all the incredible theater and opera and dance that are not part of Broadway. But that being said, I still do use Broadway as sort of a yardstick of like, I don't know, standards or something. But whatever it is, it's really an honor for all these people to be nominated because it is recognition. And actually, I want to say I'm recording this in the early hours of Monday, so I actually know who's won already. And big congratulations to them. But I'm going to let you look that up on your own because I want this moment to just be about celebrating the fact that so many talented and kind lighting designers were recognized this year. All right, and my last reflection on the Tony nominees is that I need to talk to more sound, scenic, costume designers and directors because of the 40 nominations in those categories, we've only had one of those on the show, which was Paul Tazewell. So Ethan, myself, get to work on that. Talk to some designers that aren't just lighting designers. Okay. All right. Now, the final housekeeping thing before we get to the interview, and that is that this is our 200th episode. So thank you for listening right now. I would not have kept doing these interviews if people didn't tune in and keep me motivated that they also want to hear these conversations. Now, 200 sounds like a nice little number. And when you hear it, you're probably thinking something like, oh, Ethan has persisted at these interviews for a while, and that's nice. But when I hear 200, what comes to my brain is the thousands of hours and the effort that I'm not even going to go into because it has consumed way too much of my life. And yes, I know that part of that is because I'm a control freak and I can't just let an interview go out without edits. Not that it really would make a difference, but anyway, I'm working on that. I'm working on myself. And any day now, I'm going to streamline the workflow and I'm just going to let things go a little less edited. But anyway, this episode marks 6 years of work that just boiled down into this cute little 200 number. As simple as it sounds, I am quite proud of that number. And that pride gets in my way because I didn't just push this episode out in March, which is when we recorded it. No. I let it sit unedited in the Patreon feed until I could give it the time for a proper introduction, which it now has. So let me stop talking and I'll just say thank you for listening, for sticking with me for the past 6 years. And whether you've been a passive listener or an active patron, I am so thankful for you being a part of this community, of my life. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I am your host, Ethan Steinle, broadcasting out of Lake St. Louis, Missouri. We are recording this March 6th, 2026, and today I welcome back to the show Carl Faber. Welcome, Carl.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Where are you broadcasting out of?
Portland, Oregon. Same as where I've been for, since episode 100. Same basement studio.
Fantastic. All right. Yes. So Carl was on the show on episode 100. Thrilled that he's back for 200. It's amazing that, we've all survived this far.
Yep.
But Carl is a lighting freelancer. He's a dad to two, which is very impressive to me. He's a husband to one, also impressive. And I just have to observe because, working on like prepping this episode and just in life, that Carl, you seem very organized in both your work and just the details of your life. So I sort of live in awe of you all the time.
Well, I'm that's flattering. I'm glad it comes across that way. I think it's debatable whether or not that's actually true, but thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So Carl, I actually want to start by talking about somebody that's not you. And that is the lighting designer, Mark McCullough. So this is sort of like old news, but I can't remember if I've mentioned it on the show. I know we've talked about Mark on the show, but he passed away at the end of last year, which is very sad. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, one, I'm obsessed with death and dying and life and living. But also, when I was in college, I saw Little House on the Prairie, the musical, and Mark had lit it. And I just remember there's like a fire scene, and I was like so impressed with the fire. And then also him as an individual, I didn't really meet him. Like, my job there was like guarding the door to backstage. So I wasn't even working on lighting or anything. um, but I remember it was one of those times in my life where a lighting designer walks in, they're wearing like a button-up suit, really nice clothes, like felt like very business person. And I was like, this person's very organized and they're doing this as their career. And so I just really remember him because beautiful lighting, and then also like a very put together human being. I thought all lighting designers wore like black t-shirts and jeans and had like tools on them. And then I was like, oh no, this guy has a pocket protector. Like he has pencils and stuff. Anyway, so why am I talking about this with you? Because I was stalking your website and I saw that you had assisted a lot of people, and Mark was one of those people. So I was just wondering, what did you work with him on? And yeah.
Yeah. So Mark and I worked together on production of Madame Butterfly for Portland Opera pre-COVID in 2019. One of the things that's been interesting, I've had this job as lighting supervisor for the opera. This is, I think, I started in 2017, so this is my 8th season. One of the things that's really inspiring and really exciting about that position is we get these amazing designers who come through and spend a couple of weeks with us. I mean, that's kind of why I took the position there. I've been working as a designer and as an associate for 20 years. And when I was living in New York, I did it a bunch. And then I kind of stopped when I moved back out to Portland, where I grew up. In 2014, I moved out here and I stopped assisting for a while. And I was offered this position to go back to Portland Opera to be the lighting supervisor, which involves a lot of assisting. And I thought at the time that I was kind of done with this assisting part of my life, but I've continued to do it and I've continued to love it. And one of the main reasons that I enjoy it so much is that I get these amazing designers who come into town. And I'm not really using it as a stepping stone at this point in like my career. Like, I like being based out here. I'm not trying to like steal shows, not steal shows, but I'm not trying to like, use this as a stepping stone to like,
Carl, Carl, don't kid a kidder. I know that if you could steal a show, you would in a heartbeat.
I mean, I'm not in it for that. I'm not like early career designer. I'm sort of like mid to late career at this point. And so I kind of do it for the joy of just kind of like working with great people. And Mark was one of those people who came through with a long sort of illustrious career and was a pleasure to work with. And, we were working on the show that I'm sure he'd done a million times before. I was relatively new to opera at that point. So it was a real learning opportunity for me and experience for me, even in sort of this mid-stage career for myself. So yeah, I think Mark's a really good example. Mark and Dwayne Schuler and Robert Wurtzel, these are all these designers, these like sort of household names in the opera world who've come through Portland and have been a real pleasure to work with, have brought a lot of knowledge about the industry and about the craft with them. And so, yeah, Mark was a standout in that capacity, and really sad that we lost him. Definitely way too young.
Yeah, he was 62. As I get older, 62 becomes younger and younger to me. Especially with lighting designers, it's like Peter Kazarowski, he's retired, and I don't want to age him. Maybe he hasn't made it to 70, but he's like retired, and it's almost an anomaly. Like, he's really unplugged and said like, I want to enjoy my retirement, and he's traveling and things like that. But to me, that's like an exception to the rule when it comes to lighting designers. It feels like we all work until we can't work anymore. And so when I project that onto Mark, I'm like, oh, he had 20 years ahead of him.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I know that we've all heard stories, right, about the designers who have all sort of said like, I want to die at the tech table, essentially. Like, I plan to work right until the end. And I think, I was listening to your interview with Wendell Harrington last week, and, a similar sort of situation, like continuing to work, technically retired, or, sort of going through this sort of retiring, but still wanting to work kind of phase. That's certainly what I imagine being true for me. Yeah, so it's shocking when we lose people that young.
Yeah. So I know we're a little late to the game, but I just wanted to mention him because we, like a lighting, we have so few lighting designers, I think, that impact our lives. And so he impacted mine, even though he never knew who I was. Seeing him pass is just sort of like, I don't know, sad.
Yeah.
So
this could very easily become a lighting podcast. As much as it is a financial podcast, I feel like you've had enough lighting designers on that it very easily could. And so I'm sure we could talk about lighting designers and our inspirations from them for for the whole time.
I know. That's on my list to get to, like, start another podcast that's just theater design, not the finance.
Yeah. No, of course.
It would be so easy and fun. All right. So now let's shift into you and catch up with what you've been. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to episode 100, which was my homework from last episode, so presumably everybody has done that, but you were there talking about, like, organizing your life and how you have your finances structured for your household and and freelancing. So it's been a couple years. What has changed, or what have you been up to in that time since we saw you last?
Yeah, it was such a quaint. It was nice to go back and listen to it because I was like, 4 years ago, Carl, I was so organized and so eager and so here I am almost 4 years later. My second son had just been born. So now I'm, almost 4 years into that. My older son is 8. Bastian is almost 4. As a general sort of note about myself, I think that level of organization and precise detail has probably shifted away a little bit from that. Just because, like, with 2 kids, like, I was reading a subreddit on that I follow for dads, and one dad was talking about the experience of having multiples, of having twins, and he described it as kind of switching. When you have multiples, you kind of switch from man defense to zone defense. This is a little sports metaphor. This is becoming a lighting and sports metaphor. I don't know how much of your audience will get that one,
but you're gonna have to explain it, because I don't know what it means.
Okay, I guess I'll have to explain it. So I'm not on a sports podcast. I mean, basically, like, in a lot of sports, when you're playing defense, you can either do individual coverage, you're covering one person, or you're covering a whole zone. And the way it was described in this description of parenting multiples is like you kind of switch from man defense to zone defense, where it's just like you're just kind of doing the best you can in the area that you're in. Personally, I feel like that could easily just apply to just kids generally, like not even just twins or multiples. It's really just kids generally. Like, even when my wife and I are parenting together with both of our kids, we're often not at 100%. We're often, our tanks are at 50% just because we're juggling work and life and all the other things going on. I'm constantly in this state of just like, well, I can't dedicate all my attention to one of my kids or one of my tasks or but I can sort of generally tackle this area, and maybe you can go tackle generally that area, and together we'll sort of make it work. That has felt more true to me in the last couple of years, just because, it's also like we're in this environment several years past, the pandemic, where, work has picked back up and I've picked up new things. And so when I pick up new things, I'm having to learn new skills, and I don't have as much time to sort of dig into things in the same, sort of granular detail that I was able to during COVID. That's been sort of probably the biggest evolution for me is like how to navigate all of the different things about life in a sort of more soft focus way.
Well, I do want to go back in time and mention that, because you had like a book, it was very organized with like information. And I will say the good thing about like the finance and business stuff is like, yes, our passwords change and things like that. But it's like once you have the bulk of the information, nothing really changes. Or if something does change, it's not like huge. So it's like, well, you still have 90% of organization. So
yeah, I think that's totally true. And that's what because I was listening back to that episode, the blue book, the sort of letter of instruction. I still have all that, and it's probably still mostly up to date. I had sort of grand imaginings that I would be, I'll update it yearly. I'll make sure that I do this. I'll make sure I do that. To be honest, I think that's why systems are so important in your life, at least in my life, is that was a system that I set up to keep a lot of that organized. And the value of that system is that I don't have to go back and check it very often. Like I was pretty diligent in setting it up. And so now it doesn't really require a lot of maintenance. And it's there if I ever, if I ever need it with a bunch of information and, wills and, where all the financial documents are and things like that. The numbers are all different. But yeah.
I have a question. It's March 6th. Have you filed your taxes yet?
Of course I haven't filed my taxes. Who's filed their taxes? Jeez. No, man. I mean, I'm gonna struggle to make the April 15th deadline. So
okay,
yeah.
I'm so glad because I consider you and I both semi-organized with this stuff. Like we're aware of what needs to be done. So I was talking to the stage management professor at Webster, and I mentioned that I hadn't filed my taxes yet, and this was like March 2nd, and they were like, "Ethan, how do you live with yourself?" They're like, if I don't do it by February 15th, like that's a bad year for me.
Yeah, well, you're talking to probably a single employer situation who only has to file a 1040. It's like, I mean, maybe that's an assumption, but
and they're incredibly organized. In addition to that,
if all you've got to file is a 1040 EZ, like sure, yeah, go for it, file it right away. I've got a complicated multi-state 100-page plus document to file, and
but my counter in that argument, it wasn't an argument. We were friendly chatting at happy hour. Don't tell my wife I was at a happy hour. I paid in cash, so she want to know. Wait, now I'm distracted. Oh wait, but what I said to them is I was like, well, I'm not freaking out, and the reason is what you're just saying is that I have my little Google spreadsheet tab with like my taxes for every year and my deductions for every year. And I know like I just need to pull all the files and then I just need to put some of that information into the spreadsheet. And then I don't file myself. So like then I have to send it all off. So I know what I need to do. And I also know that some of these documents, like you're saying, it's a little complicated. And so some of my documents aren't even going to come in yet. Like if they're not all in, then what's the point? Anyway, so I was like, I'm not worried. I know what I'm doing. But also, who files that early?
I mean, yeah, usually I have to wait for stuff to come in and then usually there's a period of catch up that I have to do of like, there's a bunch of categorization that I have to do left over from the end of last year. I mean, I file on my own or we file, without a preparer on TurboTax. And so there's the bulk of that work to get ready for tax prep is categorization, double checking numbers, making sure the right things go in the right boxes. And so there's a fair amount of that stuff that I have to catch up on. The benefit, the advantage that we have is that we filed an extension last year. And whenever I do with catch up categorization, I don't just stop at the end of the year. I just continue to wherever the present date is. So I think I'm categorized all the way through like October of last year, which is when I filed our extension. And so I think there's not as much for me to do in catch up land as there usually is. But yes, no, I haven't filed yet. And I'm sure I'll just struggle to make the deadline.
I'm probably saying something that you don't like. You already know this, but I'm just going to say it out loud because, again, had this podcast for like 6 years and I didn't know this until last year. You can just default, like instead of saving when you go out of town and you save all your receipts for food or whatever, you don't actually need to save those receipts in that you can just take the default GSA deduction. Did you know that?
Yeah, that's what I do. I keep receipts and I scan them in, but I don't actually take those numbers and use those because because I'm so cheap, the GSA minimums are always more than I spend on food. So yeah, I usually just take those numbers. I mean, the way that
I was going to say for years and years, our accountant told us like, oh, you don't have to. No, they didn't say it. Anyway, I was sort of aware that you didn't have to keep the receipts, but I just was always in the habit of doing it and putting all those numbers in the column. And then I was like, oh, the accountant will see that and they can either choose whichever one is like higher. But the reality is like the GSA rate put together is always going to be higher than whatever I spent. So,
usually. At this point in my life, maybe in 5 years when I'm eating steak dinners every night or whatever it is, or I'm eating something fancy every night, you can choose whether or not you use actual receipts or use the GSA rates, but you can't pick and choose. You can't be like, for this month, I was out of town and I ate really well, so I'm going to use those receipts. But then for this month, I'm going to use GSA minimums. You have to like pick an accounting method and stick with it, but you can take either one. And I have a spreadsheet that breaks both of those things down. Like I put my actuals in there and then I put my GSAs and compare the two, and it's always, the GSA rates. So
Got it. In your TurboTax land, since you file yourself, is there like a button that you hit GSA rate, or do you have to like tabulate that number?
I do it all myself. TurboTax doesn't really do that work for you. I mean, this is again like part of the reason why I guess if I hired a tax accountant, they'd do that for me. I mean, but I just have some things set up that I have a whole travel Excel document that I use every year that calculates like whenever I was out of town, whatever the GSA rate was for that time. Some of the GSA rates are different on travel days. So it's like if you do, I get half rate on the first day, half rate on the last day. And then, so it calculates all those dates. And then it calculates like whatever per diem I actually received from an organization, if I received per diem. So it subtracts that back out. But it's an Excel document that I built that works for me. That was based off of a document that this was most applicable when I was doing a ton of traveling, when I was touring for music, and every city, and I was having to file multiple states, and I was in multiple cities, and every city had the tax accountant that we used at the time, like used a complicated spreadsheet like this so that you could break down like day by day. I was in this city and I got this rate, this city, that rate. I still use that spreadsheet, but I don't travel as much as I used to. So.
Well, and that's how I am. Like 2 years ago, I tried TurboTax. It ended up taking forever. And so I gave up. But now I'm settled. I only travel for work like 3 times a year, maybe, which is very manageable to keep track of. So maybe one day I'll try it again. Although if my CPA is listening, I'm never going to not use them. I'm never going to use TurboTax.
Well, you've talked about like free tax. I mean, I know there are also these other sort of services that I've never tried. I'm so ingrained in the TurboTax like system, and I feel like I even talked about this in episode 100 where I was like, yeah, I'd love to move away from it, but I'm already in it. Maybe I'll try it this year. I've never tried it this year. I've never done that. I've always just like go to Costco, buy the TurboTax license, use because it saves all my settings from the previous years, and I'm sort of used to the way it all is laid out. So I know I probably could use Free Tax USA or one of those other sort of free services.
I will say it emails me and it says, hey, we got your W-2s and your 1099s already. And it is very tempting. Just like, it's a very good software and program because it's like, we've done half the work for you.
Yeah, it's cheap enough, it's under $100. So to me, it's like, it's worth the cost. I've encountered, this is another thing that I feel like I've encountered more of, speaking of getting older and just kind of like trying to rely on your systems. And sometimes these things like the cost that's built into it is worth it if you don't have to change, if you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I've encountered this a bunch with like some applications that I sometimes use. Like I'm still a dinosaur using Evernote because like I have a workflow with Evernote and how I save my receipts over there, and how like I can email, like if I get a receipt through email, I can email that to Evernote and it'll save it in my Evernote document. Evernote has a scannable app that I use it as a receipt repository, and I haven't found any application that does exactly that. Does exactly the use case that I have for it. And every year, like Evernote costs an increasing, and they just like doubled the cost this most recent year. And every year, I go through this mental process of like, is it worth it to justify? Is it worth it to spend $200 a year on this, or should I try to reinvent some new system here? And I just like in my position right now, it's like it's often just I am exactly the clientele that they want, which is like it's more hassle to leave than it is to just stay and pay their subscription fee. And so I just continue to send the money and continue to use my old systems because they work for me, and I don't have the bandwidth to like reinvent every system that I have, There is a psychology going on there where people often say like, when you get those subscription notices, those like, we've upped your rates and you have to make a decision in 2 weeks, like that's not the time to decide to stop using it. Like the time to decide to stop using Evernote or a system that you've used is like 6 months down the road. You've got a month to make the transition. And like, yeah, you're maybe paying some extra months that you didn't need, but like, it's much better to like give yourself the time and space to do it on your own time and your own pace than it is to be like rushed with some, subscription deadline when they email you and you only got a month left, so. We'll see. I've set a reminder to myself to wean off Evernote at some point this year. So at episode 300, we'll see if I actually did it.
We'll see if you're off Evernote.
Yeah.
All right. So I also saw in your notes that you joined USA 829's board.
Yeah, I was elected to the Western Region Board. It's not that fancy though because I ran unopposed. So, but yeah, I mean, I was invited by a past board member to put my name in the hat, and I've been on it for several years, and it's been great. You know, the way USA, again, we're going to get into lighting specific things and industry specific details, but what I've enjoyed in the history of union meetings, typically pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, pre this sort of, it all had to be in person. Membership in the Western region was at general membership meetings was often pretty low because they would have meetings in LA, and then once a year they'd come up to Seattle and maybe do a meeting up there. But like we're talking single digit membership numbers. And the Eastern region meetings would often have more. Obviously, in New York, they'd get more turnout. And then in the COVID years, they transitioned to Zoom, and they were able to sort of institute that as a means of having general meetings. And, you know, now we're in, 20, 30, 40 people, members per meeting. And that's great. And that's a great turnout. And being on the board means we get to set policy and work together to try to encourage more membership, answer members' questions about rates and contracts and all these sorts of things. And so, I've really enjoyed. The Western region is a great board. The members on the Western region are really a pleasure to interact with. And so, it's been several years of that. And I just recently joined the exam committee because the whole exam process for USA has been undergoing an overhaul. And so, I'm going to be down at USITT in a couple of weeks in Long Beach, and I'm sitting on a panel for that to talk about some of the changes in the exam for the exam committee. So yeah, it's been.
Is that just Western region exam, or is that like nationwide? Are we all syncing up?
So this is part of what we're trying to address is that the exams have been different, obviously per discipline. So lighting, scenic, all these exams are a little different, but the Western region exam is different than the Eastern region exam, and we're trying to get some uniformity across regions and to some extent across disciplines to try to get a sort of a national standard in place. Change takes time, especially in a large institution, and so this has been an ongoing sort of process. But it's been exciting to be in the room and to start figuring that out. I mean, like I have my own horror story, or not horror stories, but it was a stressful experience doing my exam. I did it in New York, and it was in person, and there was a whole room of people judging my work, and so there was like it's interesting to see like how that's going to evolve and how we're imagining it changes over time. And so yeah,
well, I wish I'd sort of known you were going to USITT because I am not going, but all my students from Webster are going, and so I would have made an effort to go up there.
Yeah, come by the USA booth. I'll be over there along with some of the other board members, and so it's cool. I was at the last USITT in Seattle 2 years ago, or last year. I don't even know. Whatever time. The last one was up in Seattle. I was there for that.
Yeah, that one makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that I know that you were in France for a while, and the reason I know this is because you were there for a long time. I feel like that is something you should talk about because financially, that sounds very expensive to me to like move there for a year or however long you were there.
Yeah, I mean, so some background there. So my wife is French, and our kids, are bilingual, and they go to and when we've been living in the U.S., they've been going to a French immersion school, and we did that on purpose so that we could more easily spend time in France if that's what we wanted to do, and move them over to a school in France that make that transition easier. 2 years ago, I believe it was, I don't know, two school years ago, we spent a year in France where the kids were going to school out there, and my wife was based out there more of the time. It started out as like a 3-month trial, and then it turned into 6 months, and then it turned into a year. And because of that, like I had my position at Portland Opera. I had a number of other design commitments back in the US, so I wasn't in a position to turn those things down. So I wound up doing a lot of travel back and forth. So it was a hard year in that sense that I was doing a lot of travel, personal travel, to make that possible. Because I was there for longer than 3 months, which is the visitor visa limitation. I had to get a spousal visa so I could be there for a year, and I could work there. It was difficult to find work out there. I ended it with working on the Olympics. That was with a U.S. employer, working through NBC, through the lighting design group. Thank you, Ethan.
Wasn't me.
And that was a really exciting experience. That was basically that was the end cap to our France experience, was the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris. So we had spent the whole year there prior to that, and then I did, whatever that was, 6 weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks of prep, 2 weeks of the Olympics, 1 week of teardown, with LDG out there.
It's so funny. I always think of the Olympics as like this forever project, but you just described 6 weeks. That's like nothing.
Well, the Olympics, like the actual Olympics, are really only 2 weeks, and then there's a fair amount of, there's prep that we, built into all that to get ready for it. But it was really only just like a 6-week project for me.
The Portland Opera lighting supervisor job you have. So you kept that while you were in France. What is the time commitment for that? Because that sounds crazy to me.
I guess the first caveat I should say is that any of these sort of lighting supervisor or staff positions with organizations, like every one of those is probably going to be a little different in terms of how many hours you're committing to and what the business structure is, what the contract structure is, and what the responsibilities are. At lighting specifically, there's a lot of variance in terms of like, does lighting supervisor mean that it's a full-time job, 40 hours a week, and you're also the electrician, and you're also doing all the, paperwork for all the other electricians. I don't do that for Portland Opera. It's not a full-time position. But what it is, we're producing work throughout the year, 10 months out of the year. But in the capacity as just lighting supervisor specifically, it's very much like a part-time kind of position. The way I have that contract structured is that there are 3 sort of components to the work that I do for them. One is as lighting supervisor, one is as a lighting designer for some projects, and one of them is as the resident assistant lighting designer for all of the main stage projects. So all 3 of those are a little different. The lighting supervisor position is a salaried 10-month part-time position, and it basically just covers like communication, keeping the documents up to date, the things that we send out to designers, maintenance of the rep plot that we have in our small space. But it's not for any main stage operas or anything like that. Once we hit a main stage opera, that's where my role, usually as resident assistant, takes over. That's a USA contract, so that gets filed up with a cover sheet through USA, that sort of thing. And that's usually a couple of weeks of prep, and then the 2 weeks, and then the 2 week load in, a week and a half load in, a week and a half of performances. Because in our particular situation, they want the assistant at every performance. So that's kind of the way that works. And then the third level is a design contract. Usually once or maybe twice a year, I get asked to design something. It's usually a concert in one of the larger opera houses in town. That's a separate position that's also gets filed through USA 29. And so, but again, that's going to be unique to this position here. Like we were talking about Mark McCullough earlier, Houston Grand probably has a different setup. I know Seattle Opera has a different setup. I did some work with Opera Colorado last year. They have a different setup for the expectations they have for their assistant lighting designer versus their production electrician versus all these. So every opera company is going to be a little different in how they structure all these sorts of things. But to get back to your question, the way it worked for me was I was able to do all my lighting supervisor responsibilities remotely, and then I would come back for the main stage operas to assist. So I would be back in Portland for for 4 weeks, and then I would go back to France for several weeks, and then sort of do this back and forth thing for a while. Yeah.
How does it work when you design? Like, do you get an assistant or?
I wish. Usually I don't, because usually the designs that I do in that capacity for that employer are concerts. They're usually pretty quick, and I'm usually not in a position where I need that support. It's usually for the grand operas and for the new operas that an assistant is really beneficial to track, all the information that's coming. And that's usually the role that I fill when I'm, as the assistant on those, either the grand operas or the new operas.
So if Portland Opera isn't your full-time, or you are full-time, but you're not full-time, right?
Part-time. I'm not full-time. It's a 10-month contract, but I'm part-time.
Okay. So then what do you do in the rest of your time?
So I still freelance. I freelance as a designer. I don't do as much freelance assisting anymore, though I do occasionally. In the 4 years since we talked, I've done some work out on some Disney ships, on some new builds for Disney as an associate for a designer that I've worked with for a number of years. So I fill some of that time that way. I do some work for the Oregon Ballet Theater as a lighting supervisor, and then I also have a part-time but salaried position with Culture House Immersive, which is an immersive studio that's based in Los Angeles, with a colleague of mine who I've worked with for a long time, Michael Garver, who's on the show. She was a guest on our EV episode. And Michael's company out there does development for immersive experiences and projects. And I'm director of operations for that company. And so I do some strategy and budgeting and planning, and I handle a lot of the internal financials. So between all 10 of those things, I piece together, that's how I sort of piece together my life, my professional life.
So if it's a 10-month contract at the opera, like of your total income for the year, is that was that 80%? I don't quite know math, but 70-80% Portland Opera and everything else is there?
No, because it's a 10-month contract, but it's part within that 10 months. It's it's very much part time.
I see. I thought you were saying part time because it's only 10 months and not 12 months, and I was like, that's pretty full time.
I think the way that my contract is structured, I think I really only do. It's broken down as basically 2 hours a week, really, and that's just for emails, meetings, those sorts of things. And so it's I get paid once a month. I work a couple hours, and that's really, in the capacity as lighting supervisor, that's really the only need that particular company has based on the sort of way that the season's structured. When we're in production, like right now, we're opening an opera tomorrow. For the last several weeks, I've been pulling 14-hour days for the last week, in the theater as an assistant, but that's not really part of the lighting supervisor job. Technically, you could have a different lighting supervisor, resident ALD, and lighting designer. It just so happens that with this company, I fill all three of those positions at varying times in the year. So, yeah.
Gotcha. And does opera have LORT A, B, C, D contracts, or is it all just one?
It doesn't work in the same way as LORT. There are tiers based on the annual budget for the opera company. And so when you're looking at rate sheets, or when you're looking at what those companies pay for designers or assistants, I will go as a USA designer, and I file USA contracts with them. I'm usually looking at the posted rates for whatever tier that opera company happens to be in. The way I structure my contracts, I always start with whatever the USA minimums are for that tier, if it's opera or LORT or whatever. And then when I'm going into a negotiating process, I will add a premium on top of that based on my own experience. So if it's a weekly contract, if I'm getting paid weekly as an assistant, I might take the minimum, and then I might tack on X amount of dollars per week in addition to that you get from my experience in that particular field. The same is true in LORT theaters, though. My experience in LORT has been that a lot of LORT theaters don't have the capacity to for me at least, they don't have the capacity to pay too much above what their minimums are. But in opera, sometimes you do have more capacity for that. So that's usually how I do my negotiating process. And the advantage to that, as opposed to just coming up with a number, and when I'm doing my negotiations, is the USA minimums increase every year. And so I've sort of got a built-in raise built into that, where I don't have to go back and start at zero with the negotiating process and justify why I should get a raise. It's if we're basically saying that I get paid based on the minimum plus a premium, if the next year that minimum has increased, then, my rate should increase along with that increase. And then if I want to increase my premium, I can, but I don't necessarily need to, because the USA rates have increased. To me, that kind of has worked out in my favor to help keep pace with inflation and cost of living increases and things like that. So
no, I really like that, because I always struggle, and I sort of do it on a case by case. My one rule is ask for additional, that's the rule, but that's very vague.
For example, the position of lighting supervisor didn't exist when I came to Portland Opera. What they called that position was assistant lighting designer. As I got into this position, it started becoming clear to me that based on my understanding of what an assistant lighting designer is, like this is more than that. Partially because I'm also doing work well before the rehearsal for this main stage opera starts to like prep the venue documents that we send to designers and all this there's all this work that's happening before the actual production kicks off, and all this communication that's happening too. I restructured my contract with them several years ago to basically keep pace with what I felt like was true, which is that like for 10 months out of the year, I'm responding to emails, I'm coming into production meetings, we're talking about this, we're doing that. That's not really related to this particular show. When you sign a USA contract, you kind of have to indicate like when does the contract start and when does the contract end, and the contract end date is usually with opening. You know, I was agreeing to these contracts under USA that didn't really fit within the time constraints of what this position really was. And so I spent some time thinking about like, what is it that I want to be paid and how can I sort of distribute this in a way that makes sense? And also what I really wanted was consistent income coming in. I mean, the way this contract used to work is like, let's say we did 4 main stage operas a year. I was getting money in 4 chunks throughout the year, you know, and it was distributed usually like how USA distributes, which is like, you know, a third on signing, a third on designs, a third on opening. I was getting those chunks 4 times a year. And so, you know, it's like getting any sort of windfall. It's like, hey, great, I got a bunch of money now, but then I now have 2 months of getting no income. And what I was trying to do was get to a place where I was getting consistent sort of baseline income throughout the year. So I was sort of flattening those peaks. And I think that's really beneficial to me. That's the sort of, in our household, that has benefited us to have this lighting supervisor position where I get a little bit of money every month. In my capacity as at Culture House Immersive, I get a little bit of money. You know, I get a certain amount of money every 2 weeks. In my capacity, you know, as a designer, I get money, you know, whenever I work as a designer. So I still get some peaks and valleys there, but we're still getting some steady income coming in. When I work on the Western Region board, I get paid a certain amount of remuneration for my role on the board. It's very, very small, but that's still income that comes in on a regular cadence, you know? And so it's like trying to find it. It's so tough as a freelancer with a family and kids and a house and all these sorts of things where like you have regular bills you have to pay, but the money is kind of fluctuating. To try to get that fluctuation down has been really beneficial to me. And I found that like a lot of times when you come into these sort of situations, like I was with the Portland Opera, that position as lighting supervisor didn't exist. I had to sort of create it. And so it was kind of seeing, you know, what other companies do, what they call that position, what their responsibilities were. I, of course, didn't like go to Portland Opera and say like, hey, I want quadruple the money that you're paying me right now to do this position that hasn't been necessary, you know, but I basically like, you know, took the money I was making saying like, well, how about we send this money over to lighting supervisor and we send this money over to here and we sort of work this out so that you're paying a little bit more than you were before because they were maybe just to make up for the fact that like, yeah, I really am working 10 months out of the year, but also distribute it in a way that made sense so that there's a continuous contract that's happening throughout the year, 10 months, part-time, an irregular, you know, payroll cadence. And then there's the peaks that come with the main stage productions.
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. It stresses me out a little bit just because in my brain I'm like, oh, Carl, he's lighting supervisor at Portland Opera. What a steady gig. And it's a lot of hodgepodging there.
I mean, the thing that's hard about this is like, I'm sure that you could, if you get an established designer listening to this podcast, they might think that what I'm doing is undercutting myself or undercutting other designers. I hope they wouldn't think that. But to me, I think that the reason I've done that is because I think it benefits the situation that I'm in. And I think this organization, this organization, like a ton of other organizations, aren't in a position where they need a full-time person there to be working 40 hours a week as a lighting supervisor. There are some organizations that do need that support. And oftentimes those individuals are, you know, if you're a lighting supervisor at a LORT house, you're probably also like the head electrician. So you're also managing a lot of the electrics tasks and things like that. I didn't want to do that. And that's not part of my responsibility in this particular position. It's tough because in taking a part-time position for, you know, a reduced, you know, only a couple hours a week, I certainly don't want to be undercutting other designers who want to be taking on a full-time position or setting a standard that's the end goal. But I also think I think it's better that this organization has a lighting supervisor position than before when they didn't have it. And I think it generally increases the quality of the work that we pump out. And so I think that it's beneficial to have it, but not every organization can support more full-time work. I mean, I think that that's kind of the nature that's the environment that we're in right now, is that not everybody can have a 40-hour a week, single employer type job. I think that creative people and the inverse of that is not all creatives want to just live this entirely freelance life of living paycheck peak, to no paycheck valley, and kind of going back and forth between this sort of that sort of turbulent structure that freelancers are often in. So I think trying to figure out your own way to getting some level of consistency, but still retaining some of the exciting, creative, fulfilling lifestyle. That's what 40-year-old me wants, or 43-year-old, whatever I am now. 30-year-old me did 30-year-old me did not want that. But 43-year-old me does want that. So
I like how you're I'm 40 or 43. Who really knows?
Whatever. I don't know. It's you stop counting after a certain point, probably.
That's amazing. No, I think it's good. And again, this is why I think you're organized, because you've really made a life for yourself. Because I have my steady gig now as teaching that I've now done for 6 months or something. I don't like telling people about it because I get paid $60,000, which when you say that, people are like, wow, Ethan doesn't make any money, and it's really sad. But I'm well, it is noticeable in my life to have that steady paycheck, even if it isn't the biggest paycheck in the world. It's having it be steady is just such a difference from the other life I lead,
A teaching commitment for $60K is, I think, pretty fantastic, to be honest. I mean, I think there are certainly a lot of people who are doing that for less than that. And I think what you're getting in that is a level of consistency, and, you're in a 2-income family, so you've got that benefit too. So, I took a teaching position for a year, in Portland State during sort of the pandemic years. And I sort of envisioned for myself that I would make a transition to teaching at some point, partially because I did kind of want that level of I sort of want one job and I want it to be relatively consistent. And I've always enjoyed teaching and mentoring and that sort of thing. I'm not quite ready for it right now, but I see the appeal for the people who do it, because it's that's one job. I don't have to hustle. I don't have to spend a lot of my resources to try to my time. I mean, it's I have just developed such an awareness that my time is such a valuable asset. I mean, I think it's probably the most valuable asset that I have is my time. And in the last 4 years, even more people and things have come into my life that really want a piece of that time. And I want to be able to give, my kids, my relationship, my job, my family. There are so many parts of my life that I want to dedicate time to, and I don't have enough time in the days. There's not enough hours in the day to be able to allocate that time. So I have to be really surgical about how I distribute that time to protect myself from burning out or whatever it is. I still got to get food on the table, but I also need to maintain my sanity. And so the way that I do that is just trying to be really, really protective of certain parts of my time. This is where being married to a French person really works in my favor, because they're so used to French culture. European culture is so used to a lot more free time, a lot more summer. August is basically just nobody's work. Apparently, nobody works in France in August. It's just off. I was never raised that way. It was always kind of especially as a freelance artist, it's just you're never not working. And I've had to sort of reorient myself to really trying to peel away from work at regular intervals that align with the French calendars oftentimes, and really learn to detach myself from those things. And that's difficult to do in the American environment, because people aren't used to, people think oh, well, this is your 2 weeks of vacation. It's well, I'm taking 2 weeks now, but I'm also going to take 2 weeks in a month, and I'm going to take a couple weeks in a couple months. And that's just the way our family operates, unfortunately, for better or worse for you. I don't know, when I'm talking to an employer. So to me, that's part of the reason why I've resisted going into a full-time, 40 hours a week, 2 weeks paid vacation type of situations, because like that does not align with the way that my family is structured right now. And that would not work. So what I have to do in this environment is like piece together, a couple of these salaried jobs that are part-time and flexible enough so that I can take time off in the cadence that we want,
Yeah, yeah. No, I think what you're saying is so important, because I couldn't agree more. Time is like where it's at. And also, like, I have hope for the future, because I'm around young people now, and they care about their time more than I seem to have remembered caring about my time. And so I'm like, okay, good. Maybe there's hope for the United States that we will care more about our personal lives and like what we need as individuals. Because I actually think back to, like, we were in New York for 10 years and I was always a freelancer, and I had opportunities to take full-time gigs, but actually the thing that held me back was always like the 2 weeks of paid vacation, because I was like, no, that just doesn't work for me. And then it was only like me and Nicole. So like it was just the two of us, but I was like, Nicole can do vacations at random times. I cannot get locked into like, yeah, I have to go work the Olympics, so therefore I can't take that time off. I'm like, no, that doesn't fly. I have to be able to decide throughout the year when we're going to go away. Now with Theo, it's even just more of a reminder, because of how, like, he's almost 3, and it's like the amount of change that happens in him within like a month. Like I'm not kidding. My in-laws, it was like Christmas, right? And then they went on a cruise and then something. Anyway, they took a vacation, but they were gone for like a month, and they come back. He's potty trained. He's like talking. It was just like 1 month and all this like happened.
It happens fast. I mean, it happens fast. And I think that that's certainly been my experience with our kids, is that like those things happen really quickly. And so I'm a lot more selective with the projects that I take on, because giving up that time with my kids and my family that's harder to do. And I'm starting to get to this age now where like I can't pull all-nighters in the way that I used to be able to. And like, it's like things like that are happening that like I used to be able to just like take the job, and if I needed to like whatever, burn myself out a little bit to like, or sort of like hunker down and do this whatever, like I could do it. I just can't really do that anymore. So I have to be a lot more protective of that time. And I think also like there's a way in which I've been a real champion for building systems for yourself and really relying on those systems for a long time. It's something that I talked about a bunch when I was teaching, something that was really ingrained to me from an early age. I mean, I started I was an intern at Williamstown, and then kind of did a grind of assisting work for several years in New York. And a lot of what I was doing during that time was kind of like learning the way that I work and trying to figure out like, does this work for me? Like the way that I time block in my schedule, and how do I track notes, and how do I do this, and how do I do that? When all the time when I'm doing that, I'm like building a system for myself so that the next time I do it, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so to me, that those systems are things that are become I think I didn't realize how important those were going to be for me at the time. But now that I'm like 20 years removed from starting to build those systems, and I still use some of those systems, and the ones that I don't use, I've like evolved those systems since then. Like it's so critical to the way that I operate as a parent, as a partner, as a family member, as a professional, managing my finances. It's like all those things are so reliant on the fact that like I have an Excel document for that, or I have a workflow for how I do that. Or like if I'm working with a designer and I'm prepping their plot for them, like I have a whole workflow that I go through when I receive that, so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And those systems are just like so. I spent a week in my intro design class talking about systems and probably bored the heck out of the students that I was working, because it was just like, you don't realize this yet, but this will become so, if you decide to pursue a life in the creative arts, like developing your system, figuring out like how you process information, how you document information, how you do all that. It's like the most important skill to get to develop when you're starting out, so that you learn how to flex that muscle, because you're going to be using that muscle throughout your professional life, how you digest information, how you evolve. I know that this is a polarizing subject, but like, the way AI has started to make its way into my workflow, there are a lot, of course, like ethical concerns about AI, and right now I'm in the process. The current event that I'm tracking right now is like I'm in the process of moving away from ChatGPT and integrating in Claude because of some of the recent, sort of the politics around that. But I think that like AI has played a role in how I operate because it offloads a lot of the tasks. Again, we're talking about time being an important asset. Like to me, like when I was going through the process of developing my Portland Opera contract or any of these sort of contracts, like a lot of times it's me shuffling stuff into AI to help me work out some of these things. Because if I didn't have that as a sounding board or as a revision surface, like it would take me a lot longer to do it. And again, time is really important to me. And so if I can offload some of those tasks with Culture House Immersive, one of the tasks was like building a internal operating structure. We have it's a pretty small organization, but like we have to build like standard operating procedures for how we function as a company and like our, regular cadence. Like a lot of that, I mean, I certainly developed a lot of that text is me, but a lot of it is like, the baseline for some of that like came from generating some of that content through AI and then revising some of that through AI. It saves a lot of time to go through that. So it's, that's taking something that has been developing more in the last couple of years and using it to my advantage. So I'm not reinventing the wheel, but I can't not embrace new technology. Like I'm going to get left in the dust. And so to me, it's like, I think that's part of the challenge of being a creative or being an artist right now is like figuring out how much technology you want to embrace, you can embrace, like what's your bandwidth for new stuff, and figuring out a way to get comfortable with it and use it to your advantage and making it a part of your system so that you can be really in control of your time.
Yeah. The ethical thing, my students are really anti-AI.
That's interesting that students would be anti-AI. Yeah.
Correct. So that was something that took me by surprise at my current university, because when I was at ASU for the 1 year, there was like rumblings of, Ethan, don't use the AI. But here it was like, Ethan, we are going to fire you if you continue to use AI. But I think it's good. But it is a balance, right? Because I remember in 2017, I was assisting on a show, and the associate designer, we got into it on Bitcoin because I was like, yeah, I feel like this is like a helpful technology for the world to have. And they were like, no, the water resources and the electricity and whatever. And my argument was sort of like, yeah, but we'll just learn how to generate cleaner electricity. Like that's not a reason not to use the technology. And I feel that with AI, it's like we as people have the power to like make AI ethical. We can make laws and things. So yes, I understand the other thing, but I think that it's a technology that's not going to go away, and we just have to figure out how, like, yes, there's growing pains, but like we can't run away from it.
I mean, in our household, there's definitely there are strong feelings on both sides in our house. The ethical question of it, I know, is something that I think about. I don't obviously want to support anything evil or support anything that's damaging people, resource. It's like I want to be a good person. I want to use, and at the same time, I also see the trends going in this direction of so many corporations and individuals and organizations integrating it. We encounter these kind of ethical questions all the time. It's like Vectorworks for designers is one of these things of just like, do I really want to shell out several $100s to use, but it's an industry standard thing and I have to keep up with it.
And you have to learn something else. That's my thing, is like, I have to learn something else. Because I'm learning Capture right now, and Capture actually has a really good way of making plots. And it doesn't offer everything that Vectorworks does, but I'm like, but is there enough here that I could switch to this program, which still costs money, but to me, it's a much more reasonable cost.
Right. I mean, it's like, it's like, what's the cost of doing business there, and whether or not you want to support a company that's asking artists to pay this thing, or if it is the industry standard. So you do feel like an obligation to keep up with it. Like, I know that if I stopped, using Vectorworks, like that would mean that it would be difficult to do my position at Portland Opera. It would be difficult to do my position as a freelance assistant from time to time, because that's kind of a so it's like there are professional choices that I have to make. There are decisions that I have to make for the work that I kind of want to pursue. That the ethics of this kind of stuff happens all the time. I encountered this with credit card. It's funny. I'm actually super curious if you've embraced rewards credit cards or credit cards at all in the 4 years.
Are you serious, Carl? Now, to be fair, it has been a while since I've talked about credit cards. Don't you know that I hate credit cards and I hate the rewards points?
I know you did. I don't know where you
No,
are
I
now.
still do.
You still do.
I only use them because I have to. Like, I have the credit card. There doesn't exist a credit card that doesn't have rewards points. If there was, would I use it? I don't know. But it's because the points are baked into like the price of commodities and goods and everything.
Yeah.
So I can't escape them. Even if I don't own a credit card, the points, I'm paying for somebody else's points by paying in cash.
Right. So what's the ethics? So like there is like kind of one of those things of like, if we're all going to have to pay this elevated fee, do you at least want the benefits of it? Or I don't know.
Yes,
Again,
I know.
It's like,
that's what I hate because it's that same thing of like, I want to pay my taxes, but then there's so many loopholes and things. And it's like, people are like, you're so stupid if you don't take advantage of that loophole. Like, and it's like, you're right. It would be ludicrous not to because everybody does it. Oh man. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's like, there's so many of these kind of ethical conversations. And I think that there's like a way in which like the place I've come to with my own ethics when it comes to, cause I use credit card points and that's paid for a lot of our those points have paid for a lot have subsidized a lot of the trips that we've gone as a family to France and back. So we've taken advantage of that benefit there. That's an ethical relationship that like I justify for myself in that like, you know, I try to do good work. I try to be a good parent. I try to do good in these other areas so that in this particular area where I know it's a little dicey, like I take advantage of this thing, not taking advantage of that, or just like saying like, I'm just going to use only cash or just completely closing myself off to it. To me, that's a less feasible, like, and to me, that's not the kind of balance that I want to strike. But, you know, everybody has their hill they want to die on. And so to me, it's like, I think those are of course decisions that everybody has to make for themselves. For me personally, like points and credit cards and doing the research on that and like finding the right thing for me, like those have been beneficial, I think, for our situation. But, you know, of course I'm aware of the ethical sort of dilemma there. And I don't love that situation that we're in. And I wish it was different to some extent, but I also like have to live and I don't know, I have to sleep at night still. And I don't think I'm doing anything explicitly evil right now, so that's good.
No, yeah, I sleep at night. I have no problem because, like, yeah, these systems. But again, it boils down to that, like, the catch-all of like we're in capitalism, and these things wouldn't work. Like, you just have to. You can't not exist in the system, right? So I don't worry. I do want to say also, my students who are anti-AI have definitely turned things in that are AI generated. I'll just throw that out.
I think it is of the moment. The curated image that folks probably want to present of themselves is that they're anti-AI for all of those ethical reasons. And yet, I think that there are some benefits.
Well, actually, we even talked about it before this call because I'm broadcasting from a garage, and in the background it's just very dirty garage, whatever. I have like Zoom, which is what we're talking on. Like, so if anybody watches the video of this, they can see what we're talking about. But on Zoom, you can blur your background, right? And I told you, I was like, yeah, but I don't want to blur my background because in the age of AI, I just want it to look like this is clearly Ethan in a garage, not like on a green screen or whatever.
You're living your honest life, man. I hear you. Totally. Yeah.
I could look beautiful. If I wanted to, Carl. Carl, we're gonna run out of time. I'm loving all the stuff we're talking about, but there's two things I wanted to ask about. One is in your notes. I think this was a note you put in, HELOC. What's just because we own a home now. So HELOC is a word that I now understand.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think what I talked about in episode 100 was that we took out a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit, and basically, like, it's basically a loan against using your house as collateral. You know, it's a loan against the value of your house. We took one out several years ago, and then we just kind of used it as a lifeboat, just to like if we ever need it. We didn't really want to close it. We refinanced. And we had the opportunity to close it. We decided not to, just so it would be there. You know, we kind of structured a little bit of our emergency fund to kind of use the HELOC as a sort of lifeboat if we ever needed it, which is not really what it's certainly not like what Dave Ramsey would recommend. It's just going back to episode 100 at me. It's not advice that you would generally hear. Most people who want to give the most conservative advice on emergency funds would be to like take 6 months of living expenses and put it in a vanilla savings account and just like leave it alone, don't touch it. And we kind of had a different strategy for us, and so we kept the HELOC there as something we need. And in the last 4 years, like we had expenses that we needed to use towards that, and it felt like we could justify it. I mean, some of them were home improvement projects, which is like a very reasonable justification for dipping into HELOC funds. So yeah, we had to, at the time in episode 100, we hadn't dipped into it. Now here we are at episode 200, we did dip into it, and we are in the process of paying it back. The rates were a lot lower. The disadvantage with the HELOC is the rate is adjustable. So when you're at a low rate situation, like taking that money out is beneficial. And right now the rate is a little bit higher, so we're definitely paying more, and we're in interest than we would like to. It's certainly a lower rate than credit card debt or doing any other sort of debt like that.
So when you say the rate is adjustable, like say you take out $10,000 loan on this HELOC, and it's at the time you take it out, it's a 3% interest rate that you now have to pay back. But as you're paying it back, can that rate go up, or is it locked in at like whatever it was when you were?
Yeah, I don't know the exact specifics of this, so don't quote me on this. This is, again, just two guys talking who don't know what they're talking about. But
I have no intentions of getting a HELOC. I'm just trying to understand more about them,
The way that it seems to be working for us, you're approved to take out a certain amount of money. So I think when we took out our HELOC, we were approved for $50K or something like that. I forget exactly how much money we were approved to take out. You don't take all that money out at once. You're just it's a line of credit. It's like a credit card. You can spend up to that amount of money. So it just sat there, just being unused, and we weren't paying any interest on it when we had a zero balance on it. As we started taking money out of it, there's a interest rate that gets attached to that money as you owe it, and that rate increases with the general sort of interest rate increases. And our the credit union that we do all our banking with, like those rates are pretty low. I don't know what the exact rate is right now, but we're certainly paying a higher rate now than the rates that we were, the interest rates were so much lower 4 years ago than they are now. So yeah, we're paying a certain amount in interest there that isn't great, but we were in a situation where we needed to take that money out, and so now we're paying it back at a cadence we can.
And then do you have a mortgage in addition to this?
Yeah. So we're paying, we were in the beneficial position several years ago to refinance when rates were at their lowest, and we locked in on a 30-year fixed rate. So, and we live in a pretty small house, and we are very fortunate in the sense that our mortgage payment is pretty low. We pay an additional towards the premium every month to help knock down that time horizon. For 30 years is a lot shorter for us because we pay a little bit more off the premium every month. So yes, every month we have a mortgage payment, and then we also have a HELOC payment that we pay back, and tuition and credit card bill. I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's a lot, it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Just things I should maybe know, but I was like, do we have to pay off the house before we get the HELOC?
No. I mean, I think,
I guess it goes against whatever the portion we own.
Equity. Yeah. Whatever equity you have in the house. So, it usually takes a couple years to build up some equity in a house. But once you have it, the bank will approve you based, for a loan based on whatever your equity in the house is, minus a little bit for buffer or something like that. And so that's essentially where we were at. We took out our HELOC was basically whatever equity we had in the house. It is a useful vehicle for people who need it, and it is often used for people who are in a situation where they need to do home improvements and they don't want to refinance and take a cash out refi. That's complicated, and then you're refinancing your whole house, your whole interest rate to get maybe cash out and take whatever, So a HELOC is a relatively easy, if you have equity in your house, line of credit to get if you need access to a tranche of money at a particular time. I think HELOCs definitely have their place. I think I'm glad that we had it. I'm glad that we used it in the way that we did. And I think for people who have like home improvement charges or medical expenses or something like that, like I think it could be a useful tool, but it's but it's not for everybody. Sometimes people have, equities that they can cash in or stocks or whatever. If like there's a different way to pay stuff off, like, I don't know. That's where a financial advisor is probably useful.
I think when I was a young little boy and I had my first credit card, for some reason the bank gave me a line of credit, which is separate from the credit card. But I think it's basically like a HELOC, and that like I've just never the only thing I've ever done is I've linked it to like if I don't pay my credit card bill, then it will tap into that line of credit, and then I just pay that back plus the interest or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. This is where the ethics of credit card companies start getting really dicey. I mean, like that's where like I've never carried a balance on a credit card in my whole life, and I'm proud of that. And I will never. I mean, again, it's like I'm happy to have a rewards credit card. I can live with the ethics of that, but the ethics of credit card and part of the reason why I'm okay with the ethics of that is because I feel like I'm taking advantage of something that the credit card companies are offering to me, and I'm not carrying a balance on a credit card, so they're not making any money really off me. So I feel like I'm kind of, I feel like I'm winning in that arrangement. I know that I'm not, but I'm sure that I'm not. I'm sure that this corporation is winning. But to me, in not carrying a balance on a credit card, and I don't know what the terms of that line of credit that your credit card company was offering, but like generally I would be suspicious of any line of credit that a credit card company might offer, because it's going to come with all kinds of stipulations and, payback fees and all these sorts of things. And generally, like for personal banking and loans and mortgage, like we've gone with a local credit union, and that to us is much better than going with one of the big name banks because they're more invested in the community and there's generally lower fees.
Wait, I got some ethics in here too. So like we have not to dox all my information out there, but we
where's the bleep? Where's the Zoom bleep button? Bleep. This is where Ethan reads out his social security number on air.
We have a Chase credit card, not a Chase bank account though, but it's all linked. And then we have a Bank of America account. We have a U.S. bank account. But these are like big national banks. And then we also have like local credit union as well. But the reason I keep these other ones is because they have ATMs like globally, right? So if I'm ever in a situation, I can like tap into them. And then sometimes I like to use their resources versus like my small local place, because in my brain, I'm like, let this big company pay for like whatever this thing is. Anyway, so in my brain, I'm ethical by abusing the bigger companies, which by the way, I'm not abusing them. They're abusing me. I'm sure of it. Like, I'm sure they're getting more out of me than I'm getting out of them. Anyway, it's just one of these funny, like ethical games where like,
yeah, I mean, I would look into it, a credit union, because most credit unions are part of a national credit union network. So if you go to most credit union, like they're usually linked. And so if you need to take cash out or something like that, you usually can. And especially you're an educator, so there's probably a teacher's credit union that you could be a part of. First off, baseline level, like nobody should be paying for a vanilla checking account. Like if anyone is listening and they're paying like a monthly fee on their checking account, like unless you're getting some interest for that, like nobody should be paying that anymore.
We do park $1,000 in the Bank of America account just so we don't pay the fee.
Our credit union in Portland, like we're part of a credit union that doesn't charge any of those sort of fees. Online banks often don't, charge fees. So those kind of like sneaky checking account fees, those are often like a thing that like big name banks will institute to have you keep a balance or something like that. You can find free checking without having to carry a balance in a lot of places now. So,
all right, Carl, are you saying I should divest from Bank of America? Because I could easily do it.
This is like becoming such an ethical dilemma. We need like I don't
even consider myself an ethical person because I'm like, it's too much trouble to be ethical. So I'll just do I'll just make myself believe I'm ethical. That's how I operate my ethical life. I don't have standards.
I have 2 Capital One cards in my wallet, so I'm not going to sit here and stand on my soapbox and say that you should divest from like big name banks. But at the same time, like I don't want to have a account at Bank of America. Like I don't have a personal account with Bank of America or a personal bank account with Chase. I had a Chase credit card. I had a Chase rewards card for a long time. But again, like my ethics of that was like, I'm paying off my credit card every month, so they're not getting any of my money. So like, I feel fine that I'm kind of like digging into a credit. I felt like I was hurting them more than they were hurting me. I don't like supporting big banks, but I also recognize that like they do make things easy, like a national bank will make it easy to do some types of transacting.
You know what, Carl, though, as we're sitting here, like I always am like, oh, we need Bank of America for two reasons. One, their ATMs are everywhere. So if ever I'm in a pinch, I got it. Two is that we use their notary sometimes. So like if you like need to, whatever you do, the mail-in ballot thing, you have to go get it notarized. So I'm like, they do it for free. Anyway, but how often do I get things notarized, and how often have I used, like, I don't use an ATM. I use it like once every 3 years. I'm not joking. I never use ATM.
Well, somebody, maybe it's me, has burned into you that fees are the devil and you shouldn't be paying fees, when in this particular instance, like, I think you would be better off going with a credit union, and then once every 4 years when you need a notarized document, paying that $10 fee to the notary so that you can get away from Chase or Bank of America.
No, whatever. And library, well, especially with ballot, that was a bad example because like everybody will notarize a ballot for free pretty much.
Well,
like,
yeah, 4 years is just a general sort of, I can't remember the last time I had anything notarized, but if I ever did, I think that my credit union does it. But if they didn't, I would happily go spend $10 to have a notary fill out a thing. If that
Carl,
keeps me from
I will say that like every episode, like I actually have learned a lot on this podcast. As much as I joke about like I never take the advice that people say, I actually have made like changes. Like one, getting an online bank that has a higher interest rate, like that has like given us thousands of dollars now at this point just by making that switch. But anyway, I wasn't planning this episode to be like, I got to get away from Bank of America, but there's literally no reason that I need to keep it. And now you're sort of implying that I'm not ethical if I'm with them.
No.
and no, I know. And then, but the other thing is we use a credit union. Like we are part of a credit union. Like I have it already.
Just cut the cord, man. Just move everything over that. That's what when we initially got our house, we did our mortgage through whatever I don't really remember. We doing it all through the title company and blah, blah, blah. When we refinanced, we did it all with the credit union. Our personal bank is through the credit union. My LLC's bank is through the credit union, is through the same credit union. So for me, it was like consolidating all of that into one like local bank kind of situation. Like that felt pretty good. It's still, I still use a Capital One card for all of our expenses, but in terms of like money that we do have, in terms of like our assets, like I'd rather keep money that we do have in a organization that we like more than a big name.
Carl, I'm so glad we're talking because we have our interest rate on our home is like 7.5 or something, or 7.8, because it was just that's what it was when we got the house. But it has since like fallen a little bit, and our mortgage person was like, hey, you should refinance, and we were like, stay away from us. We just like, it was so much trouble getting the mortgage in the first place. Like the last thing we want to do is refinance. And they're like, but you could save like $150 a month or something, which like we're like, that's cool, but like no. Anyway, that was a couple months ago, and now we're like, okay, we think like I got a steady job now, like let's refinance. It's probably really easy now. But if we were going to refinance, we were just probably going to stick with the national bank or whatever that we're using, like through the title company or whatever. But now that we're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, we should do it through the credit union.
Talk to the credit union, yeah, because sometimes just so you get more personal service, you might be able to get we shopped around a little bit because we had time. This was during COVID. We had sort of some available time on our hands. We got the best rate through the credit union, and especially if like you have a teacher's one, or if there's others, like a lot of times credit unions, they're clustered around like a profession, like a union, credit union, like that there's a labor union credit union and a teacher's credit union, and a lot of times by being in that club, you get access to lower rates because it's just teachers or it's just this. So if you have access to that, I think like the reason why I brought that up is that we're just part of we're not part of a credit union that has any sort of affiliation with teacher or unions or whatever. It's just like anyone in Portland in the Oregon State can be a part of this credit union. The teachers credit unions and those sorts of credit unions can typically offer good rates. I don't know. I'm
gonna do it, Carl. Like we're gonna get off this and like we're taking our vacation. Time being of the essence, we are taking our vacation for almost 2 weeks, starting in a couple days. And but when we get back, or while we're on it, I'm gonna be like, Nicole, we got to switch everything over to the credit union. And she's going to be like, Ethan, where is this coming from?
Oh, God. You were talking to Carl again, weren't you?
I love It's a Wonderful Life, like that movie and that story. And man, there's nothing that makes you feel like George Bailey than like going to the credit union instead of the bank. Like, you just feel like I am that protagonist. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
helping
helping
out.
out the world. Okay, Carl, Theo's nap time is up.
Okay.
So I'm going to need to run, but I need your help before you go, which is I have a Lord A contract coming up next year. The Lord A contract is the most I've ever been paid on anything ever, and it's $10,000 $10,882, right?
Great.
So but it's for a remount of a show. I know that the set designer is going to copy and paste and send over. They're not going to go to the venue. They're not going to do anything. I'm going to be doing more. So I'm like a little bitter that they're getting paid more than me. Anyway, but they're not getting paid that much more because the contract is they are getting $12,131. So they're getting roughly $1,000, maybe $1,500 more than me.
Great.
And that's not ludicrous in like in set designer versus line designer parity.
Yeah.
But okay, so the way I handled this currently, so the same show that I'm going to do is they offered me $3,000, and I said I didn't know how to negotiate it and whatever, so I was just like, that's fine as long as if any designers get paid more than me, I want to be put up to their level. And so they came back to me later and they're like, okay, you're at $4,000 because we were paying the set designer $4,000, blah 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 blah. So I want to do the same thing on this one and say, like, can I get paid as much as the set designer? Does that seem like a good plan to you? Or should I just accept this fee?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should advocate for yourself as if that is an argument that you want to make and that's how you want to advocate for yourself, you totally can. I mean, that's not uncommon. A lot of contracts are like that where one fee is the same, that everybody gets the same fee. A lot of the LORT contracts are structured a little differently to prioritize scenic and costumes and less so for lighting, sound, and sometimes video. Sometimes because I don't know really. The theory is just I don't know exactly what their reasoning behind some of that historical reasoning is there, but I'm sure you could make that argument. I don't have a ton of experience in LORT houses, but I have found that like a lot of LORT organizations, like they're reluctant to set a precedent of deviating from their from what they typically do, because once they establish a precedent, it's difficult to break it. So, I mean,
Carl, I should email the union and ask them about this house and if they have ever paid line designers like more or higher.
I mean, that's what your reps are there for. I don't know if you're are you in the central region?
This is in California. It's in California. It's in your region. I should email you.
The employer is so yeah, you should email the business office, and because they'll be able to give you some background and things like that. Yeah, I mean, that's probably how I would structure it. Is not that I'm giving advice in this sort of territory. Certainly this is advice for me as me as an individual. I mean, how I would probably do it if it was me and I felt like I was going to be doing more work is I might structure, or I might ask for like a studio fee, an additional studio fee or something else that's like different than I found that sometimes people are more willing to do that if it's a one-off related to a studio fee or something like that than like setting precedent. But again, like we're sort of getting into advice, and I mean,
no, that's actually that. No, I really like that. I'm glad you're like, this is good because this like gives me another approach that if I try that and then they say no, because I don't think it's ludicrous to ask for $1,300 more to be like on par with the set designer. I think it's a very reasonable like thing. So I think they might agree to it, but I do now have my backup plan of what if I could get a $1,300 studio fee in addition to
figuring out if there are studio fees or if there's like a site survey that you're going to need to do ahead of time because you don't have some of the resources that, like maybe the set designer, there are lots of ways to be thinking creatively about these sorts of things. And I think that I think reaching out to your union rep is a good call as the business agent.
Because they might tell you, no, they never pay over the $10,882, in which case I'll already know like how to approach it.
Typically that kind of information can be useful. I have also found that when you're approaching new employers, this is less true in LORT because LORT is very specific divisions of how theaters are classified. But this is definitely true in opera and theaters that aren't part of LORT. A lot of the rate the rate structures are based on the operating budget for the organization, for the theater. A lot of times that information can be hard. It's like it's sometimes difficult or awkward to go and ask an organization like, hey, what's your annual operating budget? But actually, if it's a nonprofit, they have to publish that information. And so you can easily go online. You can make what is it? It's not Brightstar. It's like there are places where you can look up online and see the publicly accessible filings for nonprofits to see what their annual budget is, and you can use that as a negotiating tactic when you go to them and be like, "Hey, you've got a $10,000, you've got a $10 million operating budget. Like, what's this little bit here?" I don't know. It's like those kind of things can be beneficial, and where it's especially beneficial is that if a lot of those rates are like, if you're a theater that's within $2 million to $5 million, you're going to be in a particular rate. If this particular theater is on the high end of that rate structure, or on the low end, you might be able to get a little bit more wiggle room because they're on either end of that scale. So, but again, I think that reaching out to the business agent is probably the best strategy that I could advocate for. So,
GuideStar.org.
GuideStar, that's what it is, not Brightstar. GuideStar, yeah, it's a great resource.
Okay, yeah, I just looked up 2 theaters. One I've worked at in St. Louis, which has a $1 million yearly operating. Then the one that I'm talking about, I believe, if this is the right company, it is. They have $53 million as their operating budget.
Well, if you're Googling that, Google's just using AI. So ethically, you're using AI right now.
I went to GuideStar.org.
Oh, okay, sure.
But I'm sure there's AI in there already. I'm not one to speak about the ethics. Like today, we talked a lot about ethics. That's not my area.
I love speaking about ethics because I think it's to be honest, I think that it's where I think that's going to become a point of a lot of conversation when it comes to technology, like in the future of of the artistic field. Ethics are a really important component. And it's something that I think a lot about as a parent, as a partner to somebody who's, not from the US. Like the ethics of the choices that we make, I think are really important. It's important to be able to sleep at night with the choices that you make. And everybody has to kind of come up with their own sort of ethical sort of justification for the choices that they make. And so I think especially when we're talking financial choices, I mean, ethics are hugely into financials. So yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And also in theater too, it's like, what is every single story we tell is about what are our ethics and what are we doing in this situation type thing. So no, yeah, wildly important. I'm not to say it's not important, but anything I've said that comes across as ethical, don't listen to it in this episode. Let me think about it a little bit more.
It's tough when we're having a conversation. We're trying to be honest and speak off the cuff to it's so easy to trip up and say things that might be different than how you actually feel. And so I think that's one of the sort of caveats to having a conversation on a podcast is that it's like, well, we're just chatting here. I think that I'm sure that there are things that I've said that if I were to go back and think about it a little bit more, I'd be like, well, maybe I don't want to advocate so much for Capital One. I don't know.
Yeah. Don't reach out to me and say, Ethan, do you really think that? You would murder a baby? No, that's not what I said. Amazing. Okay, Carl, I had a blast. Thank you so much for coming back and doing this.
Yeah. Congratulations on all the success. I know that it's been really exciting to watch the format evolve and all the guests come on, and I've been a Patreon subscriber for years, and it's just been it's been really exciting to watch it grow and also just to watch Theo grow up too. I mean, I can't believe that, all of this has happened in the last couple of years. Have just been a lot of growth. I know you've moved some, and so it's nice to have these touchstones of meeting back up and connecting again.
Never moving again.
You say that.
Well, actually, about touchstones though, I sort of let the quarterly updates of our investments go. Just
the 6Ks.
It was so hard to wrangle everybody, and but we have the one in May. That'll be the 5-year mark, which is when I was like, okay, at 5 years, that's when we'll decide do we sell or whatever. So that's going to be another one. Like this 200, seeing you again has been really good.
Yeah.
But like that's going to be another mark of
what's going on with your wine investment? That's what I want to. I feel
Carl,
like
don't even get me started.
Oh no, am I ending on a bad note?
That is the one that spoiler alert, I am selling that thing. I don't even care if it's a loss. It's going to be a loss. I'm going to sell that thing and I'm going to sleep better at night. It's going to be way better.
And didn't you invest in a piece of art that like is a personal piece of art that's in your house? No.
Yes, but that $1,000 that we paid for that art went away. I'll never see it ever again. But I have the art as opposed to the wine, which, oh gosh, like I'm happier with the art. I'm happy losing that $1,000 toward the art.
Of course. Yeah. And it traveled with you, right? You have that art in your house?
Yes. Still wrapped up from moving over a year ago.
Well, maybe you want to unpack that for the 6K episode and maybe mount that. Maybe that can be your background.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. All right, Carl, really quick. What's the best way to get a hold of you if somebody wants to?
Again, when we talk about time and things like that, like I've really de-emphasized socials in my life just because I really don't have time for that part of my life. So I'm not really regularly on a lot of the socials. I still am on LinkedIn. I've got 2 websites. carlfaber.com is my professional dashboard. So that's kind of gives a window into all the different various things that I do. And then carlfaberdesign.com is just my lighting specific work. So both of those websites have ways to contact me. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. But yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. The social media, that's a whole other thing of like, I don't know if it's because I'm ethically against it or just time wise against it or just getting old, but like, I don't even know how to operate Facebook anymore. Like so even if I wanted to use it, I don't know how to.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, how do you want to use your time, man? And I think that those are choices I ran into this like so many people like in the last couple of years where like, I get into this spiral with Instagram where I'm on all the time and I'm trying to post and I'm seeing all these people having their own curated versions of their lives. And I see how that can become so toxic for people. And I've just removed myself. I haven't gone to the whole trouble of canceling things or anything like that. I just don't check them. So
wait, here's a little bit of a side tangent. And maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. But I have a question that I love to ask students when I first meet them, which is like, who's your favorite lighting designer, right? And I will have to say, overall, the majority answer, or the one that's been answered the most, is Corey Paddock.
Really? Wow.
Right? I know. Like, Corey, you're amazing. You're talented. That's not a surprise that you're people's favorite. However, it is like sort of surprising. But my hot take of like why I think this is because his Instagram is so well curated, is so like out of this world, and it gets picked up a lot. So all the students on the socials, they like see his social. And I think that's why I'm getting so many answers that are Corey Paddock.
Wow.
And also I noticed like a lot of the answers are people that have social media. So
yeah.
I'm not saying it's like a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing for designers if they want to curate a social media. I think it's a really good thing. I'm not going to do it. It's too much for me. But I do just notice.
Yeah. That's a fascinating point actually that I didn't, because especially coming out of your conversation with Wendell in episode 199, where like there was a time in which like the inspirational design icons of the time were not, we're obviously not social media based. They were like the ones who were working in New York and the Tom Skeltons and the Billingtons and all this sort of the household names that we all sort of, that those of us of our generation sort of think of. And it's interesting to think that like the sort of icons and the inspiration for the moments now are more in those sort of more digital spaces. And I can see why those spaces are really valuable for a younger generation. Yeah, I think I'm quick to write off social media as like a waste of time, but I also recognize that like it can be really valuable, and that's a really good point. I think the images that I've seen of Corey that Corey's posted online of his work are stunning and beautiful and inspirational. So if people are finding in that some inspiration for their own work or inspiration for supporting the arts or going to see the arts, like amazing,
Yeah, and I should add, it's not just that he's on Instagram. He's a really good photographer. He takes photos of all his work. He makes them look beautiful. So like there's a lot of work that's going into it.
Of course. Yeah.
Cool.
That's wild. That is not the answer that I thought I was going to hear but that's it makes a ton of sense, and that's good for him. It's good for him. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. Carl, thank you so much. It was a blast.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. Looking forward to episode 300 in another 4 years. Who knows where
Maybe
we'll
I'm going to get really
there.
good and we'll crank a bunch out, and it'll be like in 3 months we'll get there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great.
That'd be, yeah.
I'd love to do a check-in. Yeah, who knows? It'll just be my AI avatar at that point, right? They will have taken over the planet. But no, pleasure to be here.
That's it for this week's episode. It was a bit of a long one, so I'm just going to observe a couple takeaways. And first, I still have a Bank of America account. I never thought about ethics for a single second after we stopped the interview. We never refinanced our mortgage, but I will say if we do, I will look at doing it through a credit union. All right, next, the LORT contract I mentioned, that is still in negotiation, so I probably shouldn't talk about it, but hey, why not? They agreed to pay me at parity with the set designer, and they're doing that through a studio fee payment in the amount of that difference. And the first response was they said they couldn't do that fee, or they couldn't up my fee because they claimed most favored nations amongst all the designers for their season. Cool. We've heard that on this show before. So that's when I suggested, thank you, Carl, that I have a studio fee that is the difference. And so I gave them that alternative. And I actually did not email or call the union to find out the typical rates because I just got busy and I skipped that step of it. The producer did agree to my request, I will note, after learning that the show didn't have follow spots. So they were able to cut that line item from the budget. And I think that, if they hadn't been able to do that, would they have agreed to my thing? I don't know. But anyway, that's how that's working out. Carl's point about making systems, that is such a good one. And as a professor now, I think I need to be instilling this in my students a little bit more than I am, because I'm just going to be frank, I'm not the best at systems, though I certainly do have them, and maybe I'm just sort of not aware of it. But anyway, as we all know, like McDonald's, they churn out burgers, and that's their system. They have it down pat, and it's not necessarily because they make the best burgers, right? Cameron McIntosh, the producer who's been putting on Les Mis for 40 years nonstop, it has a system. Like, this is how Les Mis goes together. So we have to do that in our personal lives, create systems that just do these things time and time again so they're not living in our brain or we're not relearning them every time. Yeah, and that's it, like filing taxes or making coffee every day. These are things that we just need a system for. So, Carl, thank you for that reminder. And also the zone defense thing, all right? Instead of tackling every challenge one-on-one, that's so good because my mentality has sort of always been, if you're going to do something, do it right. But one, I never really stuck with that. And so I just felt sort of incomplete and on whole most of my life. But now that I'm a father, even more so, I've been forced to switch into just getting something done is more important than doing it perfectly. So this zone defense idea is a very welcome metaphor in my life. All right, that's it for my takeaways. A big thank you to Carl for joining me on this episode. Carl, as he mentioned, was one of my very first Patreon patrons back in 2021. I do not deserve that kindness, but I am so appreciative that he has supported me in that way. I also want to give a shout out to the 26 of you that are Patreon patrons. So clearly I've taken away some time from the show because teaching and freelancing and parenting were taking my attention, but you supported me even though I wasn't putting out weekly content. And I just have to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And actually, that gets into today's episode is being published because of you. So thanks to the Patreon, right, I am able to keep up the podcast feed. So even though I haven't been putting out new episodes for the last 3 months, the podcast has stayed on the air and we've had about 500 downloads each month. And that's great. But this weekend, I had a college student reach out to me and I'll keep them anonymous. But if you're listening, you know who you are and thank you for reaching out. But they said that they're listening to the podcast because it's a class assignment. And I guess this is summer school. But even though they aren't in the entertainment industry, they are enjoying the podcast. And they ended the message with, please keep making episodes when you have time. Double exclamation point. Which I felt so guilty about because I knew I had 3 unedited episodes just waiting for me. So I decided that I had to start publishing episodes again. And come hell or high water, I was going to get one out this week. And so that is what we're listening to now. So thank you to that student, and thank you to the patrons again, because you let us keep that show on the air even when I'm off living life. And speaking of living life, I'll give a bit of an update on just what I've been up to since we last spoke, but I'll do that next week when we meet again for episode 201, which I promise you is going to be next week. Until then, live a good life, be ethical if you want, and break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.